it's my roots. It's as simple as that. And, you know, I grew up in Somerset villages. Both my father and grandfather started life as farm labourers. You know, we're peasants. We're sons of the soil, and I think it's a very deep-rooted thing. My mother's half of the family came from Lyme Regis and Whitchurch Canonicorum, and so very, very, very local to here. And I've felt very, very drawn to this area. Come on. I've lived in the last almost 30 years in old farmhouses, and the sense of history that is there, so that you know, when you dig the garden, you find the detritus. You find the objects which have been abandoned by your predecessors. And in the case of Nallo's farm, some of those objects went back as far as the Bronze Age. So we're talking about 2,500 to 3,000 years, and one was finding small fragments of pottery. And you get this intense sense of history, that you're just another generation who's inhabiting this site. The site has been there, you know, it's been farmed, people have lived there and farmed there and worked there for thousands of years, and you're just continuing. And that's, you know, one of the particular things that I tried to get into the paintings, the idea of antiquity. And in some cases, they're very, very layered and built up and textured. And occasionally, little pieces chip off and fall off. And I always tell people, don't worry, you know, it's just revealing an earlier painting, a fragment of, it's like an archaeological fragment of that painting, which also has a history. Interesting bits of grunge on it. I think there's something on the inside.
How important would you say the sort of landscapes of Dorset, Somerset, Devon are to you?
I think they're the roots. I think they're the roots of everything. And I think even going back to my very early work in the late 50s and early 60s, some of which are called landscape. And I think I've always essentially been a landscape painter. And even to the extent that when I lived in London, I think the paintings there, although they're very hard edge and very bright coloured, I think they're actually about urban landscape.
Why, when you came back to Dorset, did you find after a while you were inspired to take up painting again?
Well, I think I was, yes. I mean, I suppose strictly speaking, I'd never entirely stopped painting, but I just sort of pottered along. I think part of the reason was that I just became totally immersed in other things, particularly in sheep farming, and then later in archaeology. And it was when I started finding archaeological objects at the farm that I was living on then at Askerswell. That was what really got me, stimulated me to start painting again. And all the early works, it's not early stupid, isn't it? All the work that I did at that time was based very specifically on the archaeology around the farm and the hills and sites around West Dorset.
Why was that, do you think? Why do you think it was that archaeology at that time, you know, drilled into your head and appealed to you and it came out in painting?
Well, I think it's a deep-seated thing. I think that I had always been interested. The very first drawings that I ever remember doing were of a church at Stoke-under-Ham, of a Romanesque church and the tympanum and so on. So I think, you know, I'd always had an interest in history and archaeology. And something suddenly, and I really don't know what it was, suddenly brought it together with my art. I guess perhaps just living, living amongst it, doing the digging. And I mean, it wasn't entirely a visual thing. It was a very physical thing as well, so that the act of digging and the sort of surfaces and the textures were also things that I wanted to incorporate into the paintings. I think Thomas Hardy strikes all sorts of resonances for me, and I mean, apart from enjoying his literature, it is a very personal thing. I know we live in another century, and it's a completely different age, but I do find that stories like Jude the Obscure, the idea of the country boy going to university, or going to university town, aspiring to go to university. I think all those kind of things have a strong resonance for me.